Hello and welcome to the 15-Minute Book Club. If you're new here, basically what we do is we interrogate an author for 15 whole unedited minutes and try to get them to convince you to buy their book, really. So I'm joined by author, historian, and cat, Alex Churchill. Not that she's the cat, but she has a cat. So, Alex, who do we have with us this week?
Aside from Reggie, who won't go away, apologies. We have an excellent guest with us today, but as ever, we're going to let them introduce themselves even. So,
That's
without
staying in.
further ado, we've got some epic female history coming our way today from dot dot dot.
Hello, so I am Elizabeth Norton, and it's such a pleasure to be here. So I wrote a book that came out recently called Women Who Ruled the World, 5,000 Years of Female Monarchy, which kind of does what it says on the tin, and it looks at reigning queens or female kings throughout world history to try and get a sense of who these women are, what challenges they face, and, really what it is like to actually be effectively the face on the coin, the person who's the head of state.
Beth, I think you're squeezing a little bit too much sales pitch in there. So we might have to penalize you about 30 seconds for that one.
Oh, no, it's brilliant. This is great. And honestly, Reggie has never, ever done this in his life ever before, and he's mesmerized by you. So it's either you or the contents of the book. So without further ado, are we ready to start the clock, Matt?
We are. Beth, your 15
minutes
starts now.
Okay, so we always ask everyone first, what was the sales pitch? And honestly, it sounds like a really easy one. What did you go to the publisher with?
Yeah, so I basically the point really is I was really struck by the fact that the first woman to be directly elected as a head of state, so as a president, is still alive. And that was really my starting point, because the first man to be elected as head of state is definitely not still alive. It's possibly George Washington. There may be a few earlier ones. But for women, it's Vigdis Finnbogadóttir of Iceland. And she's in her 90s, but she was only elected in 1980. So that's kind of the starting point. We do have Isabel Perón, who goes from vice president to president. We've got some female prime ministers from the 60s onwards. But actually, if you want to look at female power in their own right, so actually the woman is the head of state, you have to look at the reigning queen. So that's really what I went with the publisher with and said, this is important. If we want to look at female power before the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, we've got to look at these royal women.
Should we just define what we mean by head of state? Because I think people can conflate an elected official versus a head of state quite easily. Because today that sort of seems interchangeable, but in your context.
Yeah, and I mean, definition was, and people can argue with the definition, but this is my definition. But it's, it is a bit anachronistic talking about heads of state back in the classical era or, even kind of further back. It's basically the person who is, the monarch or the president. So they are the head of state rather than the head of government. So the head of government would be a prime minister. And they obviously have a head of state above them. And often the prime minister is the most powerful figure in the country. India is a good example of that. The president of India is a woman. But of course, we're used to seeing the prime minister. So it's basically the person who is effectively the monarch or the president. It's the person who is absolutely top of the pile, but not necessarily the most powerful person in the country.
I think as well, let's just nail this straight away because consorts and regents. You can't do everyone. This is hard enough as it is. So I think in particular, you've had quite a lot of bitching about a lack of Eleanor of Aquitaine, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. And I love Eleanor of Aquitaine. I think she's great and a really powerful woman, but she isn't a reigning queen. And I think it's important to remove the consorts and the regents. And I mean, absolutely, there would be another book in doing consorts and regents because they can be incredibly powerful, but they have a man to hide behind. So Eleanor of Aquitaine is Queen of France and Queen of England, but through her marriages, she does rule quite a large part of France herself, but she always tends to have a man to hide behind. She's not the power in her own right. And I think it's important to look at the women who are the power. So instead of Eleanor of Aquitaine, let's look at her mother-in-law, Empress Matilda, who at least makes a very good attempt to rule England in the 1130s, the 1140s. It's not in any way to kind of say consorts aren't powerful or regents aren't powerful. But to be honest, if you're going to include Eleanor of Aquitaine in a list of reigning queens, then really you should include Prince Albert in a list of reigning British monarchs. But of course we don't because he's male.
Yeah, Matilda's always my pub one. When someone goes on about Plantagenets, you're like who's the best? You're like Matilda, you're like who? And you're like, oh, come on, like peak badassery there from Matilda. But there we go. That's me just throwing in my two penny words because you've got. I'm looking at the list here. You've got literally 5,000 years worth of incredible women on there. When you were starting to narrow your list down, who was your must-haves, your top ladies to talk about, and then also who didn't make the cut?
Yeah, so I mean, it was difficult. I mean, the book could have been, 5 times as long because although there've never been that many women rulers at any one point, there's almost always a female monarch at some point somewhere in the world. So there are a few big names that really have to go in. I mean, Queen Victoria's in there, of course. Catherine the Great, Maria Theresa, Cleopatra. So there are some big names that you can't not include. But also I wanted to go global, and I think that's really important because actually the pressures these women. I mean, we're a patriarchal species. The pressures these women face are global. Almost no one really wants a queen, really, until the late 20th century. So, I've got the Japanese empresses in there, for example, which was really important to include. And actually, a lot of people don't realize Japan had reigning empresses. So they do, they have 8, going back quite a long way in general. I also wanted to get lesser known figures in. So I've got Terry Maver Varua of Bora Bora, who I don't think is a household name. And actually, it was quite difficult to research, even though she's a 19th century queen, so there's not a lot on her. So it was important to get the smaller names out there as well. And I think also the women that didn't succeed. And I think that's worth bringing out that actually probably the majority of these women they're not Elizabeth I, they're not Catherine the Great, they're Mary Queen of Scots to some extent. They have so many pressures kind of affecting their attempt at ruling that actually it does tend to go a bit wrong. And I think it's important to bring those out. So as well as Cleopatra, I've got her sister Arsinoe IV, for example, who comes to a bad end.
I want to ask you about let's look into a couple of them in detail. I want to ask you about another Egyptian one because I remember doing the ancient Egypt thing and we got to one temple or another and there was one of those obelisks and someone had built a wall all around it. And the guy told us, he was like, oh, it's because it's religious sacrilege to destroy an obelisk. Once it's there, you leave it alone because otherwise it's bad juju. But Hatshepsut was so hated by, is it her stepson, that instead of destroying them, he basically enclosed them all so nobody could see it. Like that is a level of petty. She must have really hacked him off. But she's an awesome character, isn't she?
Yeah, she's fabulous. I mean, she was one that had to go in the book. Yeah, so he's her stepson slash nephew. The ancient Egyptians get quite close to family members. But yeah, I mean, he hated her. So she's the daughter of a pharaoh and also the pharaoh's great royal wife, which is important. So obviously they have lots of wives, but the great royal wife is the consort. So she's impeccably royal, is married off to a half brother who's born to a lower status wife. When he dies, she is regent for his son by a lower status woman because the mother of the heir isn't suitable status to rule Egypt. And then at some point, she just, as far as we can tell in the record, and it's a bit sparse, at some point she just wakes up one day and goes, I'm pharaoh now. And she is. And, Tutmos, her stepson, is always there with her. He's the junior co-ruler. But to the extent, actually, when you get monuments of them, they often get the pronouns the wrong way around because they're so used to the senior ruler being the king and the secondary ruler being the queen that she gets he and he gets she. Even though, there's no suggestion that the pronouns shouldn't be anything other than she for her and he for him. And she's fabulous. I mean, she rules as a king. And being a pharaoh in Egypt is a male role. You're the son of Horus. She's famously the queen who's, of course, depicted with the fake beard. And actually, if you go to her temple at Luxor, she's entirely male-bodied in the statues. But actually, they clearly do know she's a woman. In fact, there's a bit of graffiti that was probably made by one of the workers on her temple, which shows a female king sort of taking it from behind by a male lover, in fact. So, I mean, it's fairly obvious that they know she's female. But yeah, she's fabulous and does some really remarkable things. But after she dies, Tutmos becomes sole ruler and, as you say, has her name scratched off the monuments, is kind of almost trying to erase the fact that she did reign. And this is something that women really face. And actually in the book, I kind of bring that out, that actually a lot of women don't get given the titles kind of due to them. A really good example of that is Marguerite, who's the ruler of Denmark and Norway and then actually conquers Sweden in the medieval period. And she's called the husband of her kingdom because they couldn't bear to call her monarch. And it's only actually when Margareta became Queen of Denmark in the 70s, the 1970s, where she actually said, I'm going to take the regnal number to second, that actually promoted Marguerite to full monarch status.
That's a flex.
Yeah, it is. So it's actually famously in Denmark, and they say it whenever you kind of read a guidebook or anything, it's always like, yes, we got two queens on that day in 1972. They got Marguerite the First and Margareta the Second.
How do you pick apart some of the mishistory that comes in? Because I'm thinking of Rana Ovla of Madagascar, who, the Flashman book kind of does that thing. He's expecting one thing and meets something entirely different. And it was a little play that George Fraser MacDonald did. But for you, I'm guessing you had to wade through a lot of crap to get to the actual person.
Yeah, I mean, huge amount of crap. Actually, Rana Valona is a great example. I mean, there's one kind of a main biography in English, at least. It's entitled Female Caligula, which gives you a sense of his perspective on Rana Valona. And, she's a 19th century queen of Madagascar. She does kill quite a lot of people, but, male rulers do as well. I think she's very impressive. She certainly wards off colonization, largely because colonial powers are quite scared of her. There's a great letter that was actually sent to the Manchester Guardian, which is obviously the predecessor to the Guardian. After a failed attack on Madagascar by the French and the British, they looked at the beach and they discovered all these heads nailed on spikes from the people that had been left on the shore when they ran away. And actually, he wrote to the Guardian and said that Rana Valona had told him that she had as much right to nail heads to spikes as Queen Victoria had to send people to Australia. You have to wade through such a lot and all through history, because history is mostly written by men until at least the 19th century, really. So you get that perspective anyway. And there's a sense that powerful women all over the world are kind of a bit concerning. You need to kind of be a bit worried about what they're doing. But it still persists. We still view women quite a lot through the way they've been portrayed in the past. And there's a sense of, kind of characterizing people as good women or bad women. And you can see that in history, even, up until sort of almost modern times, really. But Rana Valona is a great example of that. Other queens, Cleopatra. Actually finding kind of representations of Cleopatra where she's wearing clothes in kind of later drawings is actually quite unusual. She's almost always naked. I was sure she wore clothes.
She wore that rug that one time, didn't she?
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
I really want people to know that. So, okay, the easiest way to write this book would have been for it to just be an endless stream of potted biographies of women in date order. And you absolutely have not done that. That's not what this book is, people. This book is thematic, it's intelligent, it's all interwoven, and it is a story. To that end, I think that helped you with things like, so Victoria, oh my God, I had to condense her to 6,000 words for a compilation book, and it was murder, but it enables you to look at things thematically. So for instance, with Queen Victoria, you focused on colonization. So who is she lumped in with for the purposes of that chapter?
Yeah, so there are two chapters where she's one of the featured queens. One is the British monarch, and then one is the monarch of India. But the first one is looking at colonization, and she's there with. So in her chapters, in the first one, she's got Rana Valona of Madagascar. She's also got the Begums of Bhopal are in one of her chapters, and they're fascinating. So this is a ruling dynasty of women in Bhopal in India. So they are the Nawabs, and they basically from 1819 onwards they effectively have a female ruler for just over 100 years, which is fascinating. Also in one of Queen Victoria's chapters, I've got Cora Gooseberry, who is, and her name is probably Carew. And actually, I've used Cora Gooseberry because I want to kind of show how she has been kind of almost constructed through a colonial lens. She is an Aboriginal woman, a member of the Aboriginal community in Australia, who effectively gets constructed as a queen by the British. They kind of promote her as a community leader. They crown her with this a ceremonial breastplate, which you can actually still see if you go to Sydney. She's got two surviving ones, but she's very much kind of created by the British, and very much, and obviously it has a huge impact on her life and her traditional life and how she's able to kind of exist. And she's a really powerful example, I think. So there are a number of women in these chapters whose lives are really affected. Liliuokalani of Hawaii is another really strong example, actually, in this period, because she's a fascinating woman, incredibly well educated. She well travelled. She comes to Britain. She comes for Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee and actually meets with the Queen. But her whole life is really mediated through colonisation and trying to kind of almost exist in two identities. Actually, she marries an American.
We need to come back to her for Patreon extra time, because it is time for Mr. Gammon. We have 1 minute left.
Oh, Matt's going full misogynist today. Go on.
Oh, the local rattery have arrived. These women didn't rule on their own. They were propped up by men who gave them the power. Why are we wasting good trees, Beth, on this silliness?
Okay, Mr. Gammon. Yeah, and I've had this so many times. Okay, fundamentally, women are 51% of the population. If you don't look at women, you're not looking at history. We're 51%, and women have always ruled. They're not the majority of rulers, but there's always a woman there at some point. I mean, there's almost no time in history when there hasn't been a female ruler. They've ruled globally. There's almost no place in the world that hasn't had a woman at some point as their ruler. So it's really important. And also, of course, women are becoming more powerful. I mean, there are a number of female heads of state today. It's still only about 10%. Could do a lot better than that. But actually, it's very diverse. Mexico, India, countries all over the world have female heads of state. So actually
15 minutes.
I think you did that brilliantly.
You did that very well. You can finish that thought, though. Go on. We'll let you do that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. So actually, if you don't look at women, you are not looking at the full picture.
Yeah.
Amen.
I mean, it would be hilarious if you hadn't actually had that several times already.
Yes.
Yeah. Go away, Mr. Gavin. No one cares. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you so much. Tell everybody again what the book is called.
So it's Women Who Ruled the World, 5,000 Years of Female Monarchy.
Do go and buy it. There are links to buy it from our affiliates on the show notes. So that means that not only does Beth get her fair share, but no billionaires get any money, which we're kind of there for that, because you're supporting independent bookshops and us as well. So thank you very much. For everybody who's not a Patreon subscriber, we will see you next week. For everybody else, though, do carry on listening, because we're going to go behind the scenes. We're going to finish that thought about the Queen of Hawaii, but we're also going to look at who's on the cutting room floor and how you begin to research something so epic in scale.
Thanks, everybody.